Hello, everyone. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and check out our other stories. They're sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. You can find our contact details in the description below. Today, I'm going to share an eerie incident that happened many years ago. This took place in 1999 when I was 19 years old. My friends and I were traveling to a distant location, about 280 miles away from home. We set off in the evening and had to attend a meeting on the way, which delayed our journey. By the time we resumed, it was already very late, and it was around 2:30 a.m. when one of my friends, tired of the long drive, said, "Akshay, let's take a break somewhere. I can't take it anymore." I agreed, saying, "Yeah, you're right. Let's find somewhere to stop." We were driving through an isolated stretch of road with not a single vehicle in sight. Back then, highways at night were quiet, and you could go hours without encountering another car. The road we were on was no different. I said to my friend, "Do you think it was a mistake starting out so late?" He answered, "Yeah, but now that we're on the road, we'll be fine. We'll make it by 5 a.m. For now, let's just stop somewhere." We hadn't seen any gas stations or motels for miles, but suddenly, one of my friends in the front seat pointed to the left and said, "Akshay, look, there's some light down there. Let's go check it out." We pulled off the highway and headed toward the light, which appeared to be about 50 to 60 yards off the road, nestled down a slope. When we arrived, we saw a small hotel and restaurant combo. It seemed like the perfect place to rest. My friend suggested, "Let's take a break here for a while. The road is so empty and I'm feeling a little uneasy. We'll leave once it gets light." It was about 2:45 a.m. when we parked and walked inside. The place was strangely quiet, and there was a bed by the reception desk, though no one was resting on it. "This is weird," my friend pointed out. "There's no one at the desk and no one on the bed." We waited a moment, expecting someone to show up. Then, out of nowhere, a strange man appeared from behind the reception counter. He was incredibly short, no taller than 3.5 feet, which immediately caught our attention. But what really startled us was his appearance. His face seemed disfigured, like it had been smashed with a rock. His skin was dark, his eyes unnaturally large, and his hands were thick and misshapen. As he approached, we heard an unsettling sound. Cats screeching, echoing from outside the building. It sounded like two cats fighting, but the sound was amplified by the surrounding hills, making it feel more ominous than usual. I turned to my friend and whispered, "Doesn't this feel off?" He shrugged. "What do you expect at this time of night? Just relax." We sat and chatted nervously when the short man came closer. We asked if there was anything to eat as we had run out of food. He looked at us curiously and said in a strange tone, "What would you want to eat at this hour?" We told him we'd take whatever he had. "The kitchen's closed," he said, "but I can arrange something for you." We agreed, and when my friend asked for his name, the man gave him a strange look and simply said, "You can call me the receptionist." It felt like he was deliberately avoiding giving us any real information. After that, he walked away. About 15 or 20 minutes later, we heard a strange noise from outside. I asked my friend to check it out. When he stepped outside, he saw a large swing, tied with thick chains, swaying back and forth on its own. It appeared as though someone was standing near it and talking, but in the pitch black, we couldn't see anyone. "Akshay, there's someone out there," he called. "Let's go check it out." To be honest, I wasn't sure I had the courage to go, but he grabbed my hand and pulled me along. "We'll go together," he insisted. Two of our friends stayed inside, while we ventured outside. We looked around carefully, but there was no sign of anyone. My friend grabbed the swing to stop it, but as soon as he let go, it started moving again, on its own. I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no wind, and the swing was heavy, too heavy to be moved by anything other than a force. It felt as though someone was standing behind it, pushing it. I turned to my friend and said, "Let's get out of here." He looked at me, visibly shaken, and said, "Doesn't this seem strange to you? The swing's moving on its own." I said, "Everything here feels off. Let's skip the food and get out of here." He hesitated and replied, "But we already ordered." We walked back to the reception area, only to find that our two friends were gone. Their stuff was still there, but they were nowhere to be seen. Then we heard the sound of small footsteps, like a child wearing those squeaky shoes, coming toward us. But there was no one in sight. Suddenly, a loud, terrifying voice shouted, "Get up and leave!" We froze in place, our hearts racing. As soon as we stood up, the squeaky footsteps seemed to move away from us. There was no one visible, but that sound, it was haunting. We shouted for our two friends, but there was no response. The reception area led to a long, dark hallway with hotel rooms on either side. We stood there, uncertain, scared, not knowing what to do next. I don't think there was anyone else staying at the hotel at that hour. No guests, no staff, just an unsettling silence. Then that strange, short man appeared again. The moment he showed up, we didn't even think about the food anymore. The first thing we asked was, "Where are our friends?" He looked at us, but it felt like he didn't hear us. Instead, he said, "The food is ready. Come eat." I snapped at him. "We'll eat later. First, where are our friends?" He looked at us, then said again, "Eat first." Frustrated, my friend grabbed his arm and demanded, "Where are our friends?" The man shoved him aside and shouted, "Eat your food." We couldn't understand why he was acting so strangely. My friend turned to me and said, "Akshay, let's go look for them ourselves. Maybe they're nearby." We went to the dining area, but there was no sign of them. Enraged, I turned to the short man and asked again, "Where are our friends?" He just shrugged and said, "I don't know," and stood there glaring at us. After a moment of silence, when we didn't touch the food, he coldly said, "Eat." How could we eat when our friends were missing? Then we heard something faint, a voice coming from below. It was unmistakably the voice of one of our missing friends. I quickly said, "Listen, that sound is coming from below. There's got to be a way down to the basement here." He nodded. "Let's find it." As we stood up to look for the entrance, the short man blocked our path, standing right in front of us. "Eat your food," he demanded again. This time, anger boiled over. I grabbed the plate of food and threw it on the floor. "We don't want your food," I yelled. "Let us find our friends." The hallway ahead was dimly lit, and I had a hunch that the basement entrance was down there. As we walked through the shadows, we found a door. We pushed it open, revealing a long staircase leading down. We didn't have any flashlights, but we carefully descended the stairs. At the bottom, we were shocked to find one of our friends unconscious on the floor. The other was sobbing uncontrollably, trying to wake him. Seeing them like this was a shock. I immediately asked, "How did you get down here? What happened?" One of them, through his tears, looked up and said, "You shouldn't have come here. This place, it's haunted." "Haunted?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around everything. "Where are these spirits?" He replied, "You have no idea what we've been through." Before he could say more, my other friend, who had come down with me, said, "We need to get out of here. If someone shuts that basement door, we'll be trapped." We picked up our unconscious friend and rushed toward the basement door. Just as we reached it, the door began to close on its own with a loud creak. My friend sprinted ahead and managed to stop it just in time. We got out of the basement, but as we neared the end of the dark hallway, we saw the short man standing there, blocking our way. He was grinning at us with an unsettling, sinister smile. Behind him, we saw shadows gathering, lots of them. It looked like a crowd of about 25 or 30 shadowy figures standing still, their forms blending into the darkness. In that moment, it felt like death was waiting for us. The figures were not visible in the way you'd expect. Normally, shadows are cast onto the ground or walls, but these dark shapes stood upright, clearly visible behind the man. It was like they weren't projected onto any surface. They seemed like thick black smoke in human form, hovering menacingly behind him. The man stared at us and said, "Throwing away the food wasn't a good idea. Now you'll have to face the consequences." As he spoke, the black smoke behind him began to swirl, separating from his figure and surrounding us. It grew denser and started lifting us into the air, pulling us back toward the basement. We screamed and begged for mercy, but there was no one to help us. One of my friends managed to grab the edge of the basement door and held on tightly as he was pulled. But his grip slipped, and he too was thrown back into the basement. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Once inside, I urgently asked my friends what had happened. One of them, still terrified, said, "It was the same black smoke that surrounded us. At first, it felt like the lights went out in the hotel, but then we realized it wasn't darkness. It was the smoke. It lifted us into the air and threw us into this basement. I asked, "But why? What did you do?" My friend hesitated, then said, "We were about to leave the dining area. We thought the food wasn't right. But the second we stood up, the smoke appeared and trapped us." It became clear that black smoke wasn't just an ordinary phenomenon. It was made of restless spirits haunting the hotel. My friend continued, "We've been trying to get out since they threw us in here, but it feels impossible. It's like we're stuck in a nightmare." When dawn finally broke, one of my friends suggested trying to break open the basement door with a metal rod he had found. After several attempts, we managed to force it open. What we saw next left us speechless. The Grand Hotel, which had looked so pristine the night before, was now in ruins. Its walls were coated in black, and it looked abandoned, like no one had been there in decades. We rushed outside, got in our car, and drove toward the main road. On the way, we saw a man walking briskly in the direction of the hotel. We stopped the car and asked him about the place. He looked puzzled and said, "That hotel's been closed for 9 years." We were stunned. "Why was it shut down?" we asked. He explained, "When the hotel first opened, there was a grand celebration. A lot of people came to celebrate the opening, but during the event, a huge fight broke out over something to do with the food. It escalated, and some people started pouring oil and setting others on fire. Everyone inside the hotel died. Only one man survived, but he didn't live long. He kept saying he saw strange things in the hotel. After that, no one ever dared to reopen it." We asked him if he knew anything about the strange figure we had encountered. He replied, "There was a guy who worked as a night watchman at the hotel, kind of a quirky little guy. But after the incident, no one knows what happened to him. His disappearance still doesn't make sense." A chill ran down our spines. Had we come face to face with his ghost, or was it something even worse? As we drove away from the hotel, we couldn't shake the feeling that what we experienced might have been real, or maybe we'd been trapped in some nightmare that defied all logic. Friends, this was one of the most terrifying things that's ever happened to me. I've got a lot more spine-chilling stories like this from our subscribers, and I'll be sharing them with you soon. But for now, stay safe and remember, some places are best left alone. That night are still burned into my mind, like they happened just yesterday. It started off as a simple trip with my family. We were heading to a small town about 30 miles from where we lived, a route we usually took by train. This time, though, we decided to drive. It was supposed to be an easy drive, but what happened changed everything. We had to decide between two routes: the longer, safer highway or a shortcut through a forest that would save us about 10 miles. My dad, who'd driven the forest route a few months before, said it was the better choice. The main highway was under construction, full of potholes and rough patches. Reluctantly, we agreed and turned into the woods just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The dirt road twisted through the thick forest, its uneven surface forcing us to slow down. The temperature dropped and a strange, heavy quiet settled over the area. Then my dad suddenly said, "Did you see that? Something just crossed the road." We all looked around, but no one else had seen anything. My younger brother, always a drama king, broke the silence. "I heard this place is haunted. People say strange things happen here." I shot him a look. "Knock it off with the ghost stories," I said, trying to cover up my own creeping unease. We kept going, but the air in the car felt thick with tension. A few miles later, we came across something disturbing. A dead animal sprawled across the road. Its body was stiff, and the smell was unbearable. "Looks like it's been there for a while," my dad muttered as he carefully steered around it. Just a mile later, we saw another carcass in the middle of the road. This one was just as unsettling. My mom started to get nervous. "This doesn't feel right," she whispered. "We should turn back." "It's just some bad luck," my dad said, but his voice didn't have the usual confidence. We pressed on. Soon, we saw something up ahead. There was a figure sitting in the middle of the road. It was hunched over, wrapped in what looked like a heavy blanket, rocking back and forth. My dad honked the horn, but the figure didn't move. "I'll go check it out," he said, stepping out of the car against my mom's protests. We watched nervously as he approached. Then, without warning, he froze. Panic gripped us as we rushed to him. When we reached him, something happened that none of us could explain. The figure, still facing away from us, started to turn, except it wasn't natural. Slowly, its head twisted all the way around until it was staring at us. Its eyes were hollow, empty, and its smile, if you could call it that, was unnatural, too wide, too unsettling. Whatever we'd encountered that night was beyond anything we'd ever imagined. To this day, the memory lingers, a haunting reminder of the forest and the eerie secrets it keeps hidden. His eyes were like burning coals, and his face was hidden beneath a thick, wild beard. His eyebrows were so long, they practically covered his eyes, and he was staring at us. When he moved his eyebrows, it felt like the ground beneath us was giving way. We were now desperately trying to figure out how we could escape. Just then, we managed to lift my father and get him into the car. I had learned a little about driving, and by then I had enough experience to take control. I quickly told everyone to get in. Once we were all inside, I started the car and began driving. My mom said, "Drive right over him." I was stunned. "Mom, what are you saying? He'll die." She replied, "The locals weren't joking. This isn't just some prank. It's a ghost or spirit." I paused for a moment, then said, "All right," and pressed down on the gas. As I sped up, the car got closer, but suddenly it stopped by itself. I looked again, and the man who had been sitting had vanished. I tried starting the car again, and this time it roared to life. We moved forward, my mom quickly tying some cloth around my dad's head to stop the blood from flowing. I pushed the accelerator, trying to get us out of there as fast as I could. We hadn't gone far when we saw him again, sitting in the exact same spot. My hands started shaking, and my feet felt like they were glued to the pedals. I looked back at my mom, whispering, "Mom, look, he's sitting there again." She calmly said, "This time, don't stop the car." The man stood up, staring at us, his body still wrapped in a blanket, but his eyes shone through, piercing the darkness. A few moments later, the car came to a halt again, completely on its own. The man walked toward our car and stood silently. He then made some sort of gesture, but we had no idea what it meant. I tried starting the car several times, but it wouldn't budge. When I got out of the car to check under the hood, he grabbed my arm, yanked me forcefully, and threw me into the air. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my body. Struggling to get up, I could barely focus on anything but protecting my family. My dad was still unconscious in the car, unaware of what had just happened. I managed to crawl back up to the road, only to find that the man was gone. There was no sign of him anywhere. When I finally reached the car, I heard my mom screaming, tears in her voice, calling my name. She was trying to comfort my dad, and when I climbed in, she told me to lock the doors. I did, my body bruised and aching. We were both in tears, and I couldn't help but think how everything had changed in the blink of an eye. Just hours ago, we had been so happy, looking forward to a simple trip, and now we were trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, I saw someone on a bike approaching in the rearview mirror. He had a trident with him. The man, maybe a priest, stopped near our car and began staring at us. I nervously rolled down the window and told him everything. He asked us to get out of the car. I stepped out, and he took a thread from his trident and tied it around my wrist, then tied it to the steering wheel. "Now, no one can harm you," he said. His words proved true. As soon as I started the car, it roared to life, and we were able to drive away without issue. When we finally reached the town, we told everyone what had happened. Many of the locals confirmed that the man was a kind-hearted person who roamed the forest, helping others. I still don't know who he truly was, but I can say for sure that he was a good man. My dad is still alive today, and he remembers that night clearly. After that experience, we didn't take the road through the forest for years. But in 2019, we finally returned, taking the same route for the first time since that night. 2 years ago, when I was in 7th grade, I had a close friend named Emma. We did everything together: homework, hanging out after school, and even going on bike rides through our small town. That evening was like any other. After school, Emma and I decided to ride our bikes around town, talking about everything from our favorite TV shows to the upcoming science fair. As the sun began to set, I offered to drop her off at her house before heading home. Emma's house was just a few blocks from the edge of the woods. These woods, dense and vast, were both a source of adventure and unease for the kids in our neighborhood. Tales of strange noises, shadowy figures, and ghostly sightings had circulated for years. But being seventh graders, we dismissed most of them as silly rumors. That evening, as I waved goodbye to Emma at her front door, the shortcut through the woods called to me. It wasn't the first time I'd used it. It cut my journey home nearly in half. Besides, I'd never experienced anything unusual there before. The dim light of the setting sun seeped through the trees as I pedaled onto the narrow, leaf-strewn path. The woods were eerily quiet that night. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just the faint hum of my bike tires crunching on the dirt path. I shook off the unease and focused on the trail ahead, but something caught my eye through the trees, a pale figure standing still among the shadows. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light or maybe a stray hiker. But my curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I stopped my bike and got off to take a closer look. As I stepped closer, my heart sank. It was a girl, her back turned to me. Her long hair was tangled and her white dress was torn and dirty. But it wasn't just her appearance that froze me in place. It was the way her feet were turned completely backward, as if they had been twisted by some unimaginable force. Her arms hung at odd angles, as though her joints didn't work the way they should. My first instinct was to run, but as she turned slowly to face me, my breath caught in my throat. Her face looked so familiar. It was Emma's face. "Emma?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The girl didn't respond, but took a step forward, her twisted feet moving unnaturally. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. My mind raced. Emma couldn't possibly be here. I had just dropped her off at home. As the figure moved closer, I noticed her expression. It wasn't the warm, cheerful face I knew. Her eyes were cold and hollow, her lips curling into a faint, unsettling smile. "Why did you leave me?" she said in a voice that wasn't Emma's but carried an eerie resemblance. I stumbled backward, my mind screaming at me to run. Somehow, I managed to turn and sprint back to my bike. I pedaled as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare look back until I reached the edge of the woods. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, the figure was gone. The path was empty, as if nothing had been there at all. Once I got home, I burst through the door, gasping for breath. My mom, startled by my disheveled state, asked what had happened. I told her everything, every unsettling detail. She frowned, dismissing it as my imagination playing tricks on me. Still shaken, I decided to call Emma. I had to know if she had somehow been in the woods. Maybe it had been some kind of elaborate prank. "Emma," I blurted out, "were you in the woods tonight?" "Are you crazy?" she replied, her tone confused. "I was home the whole time. You dropped me off, remember." Her answer sent chills down my spine. To this day, I don't know what I saw in those woods. Was it an illusion? A spirit? Or something worse? The memory still haunts me, and I've never set foot in those woods again. Whatever was there that night, it wasn't Emma. This was Sam's story. Now let's move on to the next one. This story is from about 40 to 45 years ago, before I was born. My family had a textile business, a mill that was managed by my uncles and cousins. We had a medium-sized delivery truck, which was normally used for transporting goods and making deliveries. Typically, the driver would handle the deliveries, but one night there was an urgent order with a large batch of clothing. So my younger uncle, who is 2 years younger than my father, decided to go along with the driver for the first time, sitting next to him in the passenger seat. They loaded the goods, secured the truck, and locked it, then set off for the delivery. They were listening to country music, enjoying their drive. Let me tell you, we lived in a small city, and this delivery was to be made to a location far outside of town. They started their journey around 10 p.m., and it was winter, with some fog on the way. As you all know, fog is pretty common in the winter nights around here. After an hour and a half, they had already left the city area. The highways back then weren't as smooth as they are now. The roads, even the highways, were rough, and you couldn't tell the difference between a highway and a dirt road. They were now driving through the countryside, on a village path that sometimes had narrow roads and sometimes dirt roads. The roads would suddenly be unlit, and at times they would pass through dense forests with no lights. The atmosphere was eerie, as though they were in the middle of a horror movie. Around 2:30 or 3 a.m., they hit another stretch of forest road. They thought, this road is so rocky with the dense trees around, and it's so dark. The road was so narrow that if one truck passed, another couldn't possibly get through. They started wondering when this bad road would end and if they'd ever find a better route. Due to the rough terrain, the truck was moving slowly, probably around 20 to 30 miles per hour. The headlights didn't help much either, and the fog made it worse. The headlights barely lit up the path, and the truck was swaying so much on the rocky road that the view ahead seemed blurry. Then my uncle, who was sitting next to the driver, noticed something ahead around 40 to 50 yards away, walking right in the middle of the road. It seemed like a person dressed in white. The truck was moving in the same direction, and my uncle could see the person's back clearly. At that hour, around 3 a.m., who could be walking alone in the dense woods? As they got closer, he could see long black hair sticking out from the white dress, so he realized it was a woman. His first thought was that maybe the woman had been abandoned by her family in a nearby town, as things like this used to happen in the past. Maybe she was crazy or in need of help. He told the driver to honk the horn loudly to alert her, but the woman just kept walking ahead without turning around or moving aside. The driver then increased the speed from 20 to 30 miles per hour, then 40 and even 50 miles per hour on the rough road, hoping to get closer to her. But to their surprise, she remained the same distance ahead. The faster they went, the further the woman seemed to stay. Now, my uncle was so scared, his body trembling and his head aching. It was something he had never experienced before. He began chanting a prayer he knew by heart, hoping for comfort. After a while, he turned to the driver and asked, "What was that?" The driver, unfazed, replied, "I see this kind of thing all the time. I've heard stories from other truck drivers too. That was a spirit. They tend to show up in specific areas at certain times, often where something bad happened to them or where they were killed. And once they're there, they don't leave. And listen, never stop the truck, never get out to help them. Otherwise, you might not make it out alive." My uncle shared this story with me 10 years ago, and friends, this is a true event. The person who sent us this story is named Yash. So friends, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the stories we shared. Let me know which one was your favorite in the comments section below. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe before you leave. See you in the next video.